our second distinguished speaker is Professor Tan Son Singh, and he received his baccalaureate and master degree from the National University of Singapore, and his PhD from Nanyang Technological University. Professor Tang also attended advanced development program in well-known university as Stanford and Harvard. His speech will be on transforming teacher education in the 21st century. Please, Professor Tan, 25 minutes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aromi, Vice Minister of Educational Development.
This one, okay.
Right.
This one.
Yes. No, the other one, sorry.
This one.
Okay, yeah. I hope to share with you from the perspective of the impact of education. I'll talk something about goal, congruence, openness to innovation, the development of quality teachers, world contextualization, and trust empowerment for teachers. I'll take two perspectives. One is give you an idea of the Singapore approach to education and the role of NIE as the university complementing the efforts of the Ministry of Education. Well, I think the first point I want to share is the importance of taking impact perspective of education. Allow me to tell a little story. Story was told about the great Professor Albert Einstein, who once bought a train. He got his ticket, he went up, and then the train conductor came to him and looked for his ticket. Now, somehow Einstein had a lot of pockets, so he couldn't find his ticket. So he turned to the conductor and said that, you know, my name is Einstein and I work as a university professor. The conductor realized it was a famous professor, and the conductor says, okay, sir, don't worry about the ticket. And so the conductor went away. A few minutes later, the conductor walked down the aisles of the train, and he found that Einstein was still very busy looking for the ticket. So he went to the professor and said, sir, don't worry about the ticket. I know who you are. And Einstein looked at him and says, I also know who I am, but I don't know where I'm going. So my point here is that it is more important to know where we are going than who we are. So in education, many times, we fail to look at the impact factor. And I think today, both from the reports of McKinsey and a lot of recent research in teacher education, it's very clear that transparency, accountability, professionalism, and high standards are critical to successful teacher education. So from the point of policy inception to design and implementation, the key is to have clarity and communication in the policies and perspective. I think at the end of the day, when you talk about 21st century competencies, it is about living in terms of the personal, social, national, and the universal citizenship skill. It's about thinking. And this is a very important aspect of the development of the teachers, because they influence the way in which the students think in terms of their habits, in terms of their disposition, and of course, working, because we live in a very different environment today. The foundations of a Singapore educational system are basically, number one, we take a ability streaming approach so that students can benefit from the teacher based on their levels of development. There's a strong emphasis on the foundation of mathematics and science throughout the system. And that is also emphasized in the way we recruit teachers in terms of their content ability in mathematics and science. In 1997, we launched the Thinking School Learning Nations, and that actually further emphasized the importance of thinking process in the classroom and educational system. In more recent years, we moved towards what we call innovation and enterprise, where we are emphasizing what we call teaching less and learning more, where we encourage innovation in the process of learning. And of course, we hold on to a very strong bilingual policy. That's why you find that most Singaporeans are proficient in English, Chinese, mother tongue. The other point is that it's important to have what we call goal congruence. And here we speak of the synergy of the commonness of purpose between the university, the Ministry of Education, and the schools and stakeholders. So oftentimes in Singapore, we do receive some Western critique that we lack in terms of debates and so on. But actually, we do have a lot of debates. But the point here is that the debates happen only at a philosophical point, but at the end of the day, what is most important is the alignment of purposes in the implementation. So not much time is wasted further once we have a clarity of what has to be done. So you can see that in this tripartite picture, the Ministry of Education, the university, and the school works in very, very close partnership. For example, myself as the dean, almost every week I have some visits to the school. And almost every week, I would also have some discussion and meeting with the Ministry of Education. So the alignment of the purposes provide a tight use of resources and implementation of policies and ideas. The third thing is the importance of openness at all levels to change and innovation. I think in Asia, there's an aggressive adaptation that is happening, and there's a big hunger for novelty and learning. And there's a strong recognition of the fact that two things have changed. One, the nature of knowledge, and secondly, the nature of participation from our students. In my generation, I used to tell my colleagues that we have great tolerance for meaninglessness. What I mean is that we could sit in a classroom, and irrespective of whether the teacher makes sense or not, we will be there quietly nodding our heads. But in this generation today, if a classroom appears meaningless, they feel that they have the right not to be there. So the nature of participation have changed, and therefore the educational, methodological, and practice have to change. The other thing is that there is a need to balance between what we call habits and routines. I think education is very powerful in capitalizing on good habits. We need habits, we need routines from the primary school to the secondary school. We need good learning by imitation, by modeling. In Asia, a lot of memorizing. But whilst these are good in laying the foundation for fundamentals, they are not so good in dealing with the changing world today in terms of the problems and the complexity. And therefore, there is a need to address the balance and issue of novelty in education. In other words, the teaching approach, therefore, to have to be diversified tremendously. The other thing is that to know something today, we require multiple ways of knowing and multiple disciplines. We all know that the curriculum is often organized in ways that is quite in silos. And it is often analyzed in an analytical way for the convenience of teaching, but not necessarily the best way of dealing with the world problems. And so there is a need to do teaching in a more multidisciplinary way, where the students spending their time in the classroom, we've got to ask ourselves, to what extent the students are learning to generate apart from just being analytical. Therefore, it is important to have a very holistic education where students learn to see bigger perspective in terms of the big picture. They learn to be more imaginative. They learn to practice generative, divergent, analogical thinking, and be able to zoom in as well in details for analytical thinking. On the other hand, it is very important to recognize two major initiatives, and we have a strong initiative in what we call national education, as well as ICT in education. Why is that so? Well, in the case of national education, I think education has a very key role in preserving the values of the society and the nation. Because our students today are global citizens. They have an access through the internet to the entire world. How does a young child, in his exposure to the world, form his values and his thinking? Without a strong core values and national education, our children and our next generation will lose their direction. And so when we recruit our teachers, for example, recently I just gave a talk as a dean to a new batch of teachers. My point to them is that you are not here just to teach the subject, just to teach mathematics or geography or history. You are also, by virtue of the fact that you are a teacher, you are also a custodian of the societal values and the national values. So this is a very, very critical aspect. So whilst we emphasize very strongly and we invest heavily in ICT to ensure that our students are exposed to the world and is able to tap on the best of technology, on the other hand, the values cannot be compromised. So in the 21st century competencies and the desired outcomes of the students, we look in terms of high benchmark standards in terms of the curriculum, and we try to take what we call a more holistic approach to education. It involves language, numeracy, the building of character, and the nurturing of values, as I mentioned. One of the emphases here in the holistic learning is the character and the social-emotional learning of the children. As you know, a happy and well-motivated child will really enjoy learning in school. I think in Asia, there is a high amount of emphasis on diligence. And I think that is good. For a young child, I think diligence is that hallmark or the foundation of good education. In other words, there is that imprint in the child that I'm not afraid of difficulty. I'm not afraid of hard work. Hard work is good. Hard work is enjoyable. Hard work is, is the basis of the character. But apart from that, you need to make sure that the emotional wellness of the child is taken care of, especially in a very highly competitive society with heavy content loading, heavy curriculum hours. The nature of social-emotional learning becomes important. And so there is a higher infusion within the holistic curriculum where we emphasize the importance of teachers taking care of the learners. I will just go straight now to a very key factor, teachers. We recognize strongly that the teachers are the key front line and they bid for the success or failure of the educational system. I think it is also very clear in the World Bank studies that when teachers are given clear expectations with good recruitment policy, with strong school leadership, with good monitoring in teaching and learning, and the matching of teacher-student styles of learning with professional development, teachers will do well. In Singapore, one of the things that is unique is we have a very comprehensive teacher development track. In other words, a person can remain as a classroom teacher and rise to what we call the lead teacher, the master teacher, and the principal master teacher. So for example, if a person is a principal master teacher, he is respected and he is actually remunerated, sometimes even better than the school principal. So that a person can really remain as a teacher and be a top teacher. Now in the pre-service, one of the things we emphasize is what constitutes the professionalism of the teacher. So the question often asked to me as a dean of teacher education is that, what's so professional about a teacher compared to, say, a doctor or other profession, right? Now, a doctor is a professional only because he is able and he cares for the patient. So similarly, a teacher is a professional only because he cares for the learner. So one of the first foundations we lay in the preparation of the teacher is that the teacher is the expert and the teacher is the one who cares and knows most about the learner more than anybody else in the world. Just like a doctor knows more about the patient, the teacher knows more about the learner than anybody else. So the way in which we structure our teacher preparation is, first, you are a teacher of the learner. And that is why we put in a lot of emphasis on educational psychology, the social context of learning, understanding the learner, and so on. Because the teacher, first and foremost, must believe in the learner even more than the parents. The parents may not believe in the learner because the parents lack the educational psychology, the parents lack the understanding of development of the child. But because the teacher have a good knowledge of the development of the child, the teacher has great confidence that I can help the child learn. That is the characteristic of the teacher. The number one characteristic is his care for the learner. The number two characteristic as a professional is that the teacher's identity, right, is exemplify the role of the learner. So the teacher, more than anybody else, have to role model his learning to the student. And that is why we emphasize a lot on professional development and continuous lifelong learning, both in terms of his subject mastery as well as his pedagogy. In other words, how do you characterize yourself as a teacher? You have to have what we call the ethical consideration. And the ethics of it is, when you teach chemistry, when you teach a subject, you are very confident that you are telling the student the best possible knowledge, not just an arcade knowledge. So that is the personal identity of the teacher, one that quests for high standards and as a model of the learner. The other thing we tell our teacher is that you do not teach alone. You are not in the classroom alone. You belong to a community. So a teacher do not bear all his problems, right? He do not just think of ways of improvement just within his own self. He belongs to a community. And therefore, a teacher all the time is sharing with other professionals. And so we have what we call the mentoring scheme, where we put in the image of every beginning teacher, the fact that when you go to the school, you are being mentored by people. On the other hand, when you are in the service for a while, you are also mentoring other people. So it is a concept of professional mentoring and learning. And so we encourage the development of professional associations where teachers on their own will form groups and have that sort of mentoring. Because that is precisely what education is all about. It is about legacy. It is about you mentoring other people and always learning from others. So we put in a very clear framework. So the teacher is a professional because, number one, he cares for the learner. He has a strong identity of continuous development himself, and he belongs to a community where he grows with the community. And therefore, the teacher also has been told that you have to also protect the image of the teacher. And we also link the community to the larger community. In other words, if the community loses respect for the teacher, then that is the end of society. So we feel very strongly that the image of the teacher has to be maintained. And so teachers protect, teachers build the professional image, especially in today's society where there are so many competing professions and where as a result of salaries and things like that, the teachers sometimes suffer in terms of the professional image. So being a pragmatic society in Singapore, that's the reason why we pay highest salary. Yesterday, Andreas Schleicher shared about the different systems, creating different kinds of motivation. So in the Singapore society case, we pay high salaries to teachers. So we encourage teachers in terms of development, in terms of professional practice, in leadership, as well as in personal effectiveness. Well, just the quick model, you can see in this model here, values, skills, and knowledge. And you will see the values there. I put a cube there because when we prepare a teacher in our university, the first thing we tell them is, number one is values, number two is values, number three is values. So we want to emphasize the values component. And I think in today's world, in the 21st century, the values component is one of the most critical factors for the teacher in terms of the preservation of society. And then, of course, skills and the knowledge. And you can see down there, we emphasize a lot on pedagogical innovation, the theory-practice link, where we work very closely with the schools as partners. We realize that as the university, although we have the research and the theoretical knowledge, we need a very strong partnership in the schools. So there's a high synergy of movement between people in the school and the university in the training of our teachers. I'd like to say something about the professional development. Teachers are encouraged. We wish to emulate, if possible, the Finland system. The Finland system obviously has a great advantage because their teachers are the most qualified with a master's degree. We hope to move in that direction. So that is why, as we move towards a graduate teaching force, we also encourage our teachers to pursue higher degrees, master's, doctorate, to further enhance their learning. Because I think we have come to believe that there is a good correlation between the teachers' academic qualification and professional qualification and the quality of teaching that they can impart to the learners. We also expand our school leadership professional development. The principals are very, very key in creating the school culture and learning, and so the selection of principals is a very, very intensive process in Singapore. The other thing is that we also diversify the career tracks of the teachers, so the teacher can move from the classroom to become a specialist and vice versa. We are moving towards, despite the good achievement, we are also reducing class size slightly, but in a different way, in the sense that we reduce the student-teacher ratio by giving the numbers to the school, and the school will be able to deploy the teachers in ways that they see most suitable. Of course, for professional development, it's important to invest in resources, in centers, and we recently also set up the Academy of Singapore Teachers, where to give greater support to the professional practices. The other point, I think, is the importance of aware awareness and contextualization. It's very easy for teachers teaching their subjects after a while to forget about what is happening elsewhere. So one of the key things is, in today's world, I think it is very, very important for that global awareness and the contextualization. And so both in terms of the curriculum, the process, and the practices, there is an emphasis to understand the bigger picture of things. So to be plugged into the global society, to understand context. Knowledge in itself is dead unless you can contextualize knowledge, and the importance of contextualizing knowledge to the important fields today. So for this reason, we provide work attachment schemes for the teachers with more experience, whereby they can take time off actually to be attached to companies, to industry, to see some real-world processes of what is happening, so that they are able to contextualize the theoretical learning in a real and changing world. So in short, it's very, very important in the 21st century to have a new perspective to understand learning, and learning internationally with that global perspective, like what is happening here in Saudi, and to have a very strong cultural rootedness. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Tan, the Dean of Teacher Education at the National Institute of Education, Singapore. And thank you for the informative presentation. We thank you very much, and I'm sure that we will learn from. When it comes to educational reform, educators talk about school-based reform, and teacher and the school principal play the key role in improving the student achievement in school. So from Professor Tan's presentation and Dr. James' paper, we can realize that there are many elements for educational reform, especially at the school level, which principal and teacher play the key role.